Okay, everyone. So what I've done, I've just given you an extra picture. I've just fixed this up because it wasn't quite correct. So I've given you an extra image here to explain what I said before. So it was the parasympathetic nervous system or neuron talks to the SA node and AV node, whereas the sympathetic nervous system talks to the SA node, the AV node, and the muscle cells in the ventricle. So I just added that in because it wasn't quite correct, and I want to make sure that you're giving you the right information. And then we looked at how the SA node depolarizes itself. Okay, so now what you've learned about is neurons fire action potentials. So you know about those already because we did that in the neuroscience topic. Now you've learnt that the SA node also has its own action potential. Okay, and now what we're going to learn about is that muscle cells of the heart also have their own action potentials. So whilst it was kind of painful to learn about action potentials, you really need to understand them. Okay. So what this is, now we're going to look at the action potential of a cardiac muscle cell. And the reason why you need to understand this is because you will encounter patients that are taking medicines that affect this. All right? So let's have a look at this and highlight the relevant parts. I'm just going to use the highlighter option, I think. So once the SA node has fired its action potential, then that results in an action potential being generated in the cardiac muscle cell. Just like before, when we saw one neuron firing an action potential and then eliciting another neuron to fire another action potential. So two neurons talking together is the same thing as what's happening here. The SA node is telling the muscle cell. So the action potential signal is going from the SA node, and then now it's going through the cardiac muscle cell. And when the action potential goes through the cardiac muscle cell, that cardiac muscle cell then contracts. And this is going to be the same for when we look at how your skeletal muscles work. It's exactly kind of the same thing. Well, it's very, very similar. Okay, so the action potential at the SA node, it's going to cause an action potential in the cardiac muscle cell, which is going to cause that cardiac muscle cell to contract. So here we go. So the depolarization causes voltage-gated sodium channels to open. Here they are again. Your enemy, which means that sodium is rushing into the cardiac muscle cell. And that is what happens at phase 1. Exactly the same as the neuron action potential. Then what happens is that you have calcium channels opening. And calcium comes in. And that's what happens at stage 2. Then what happens is that the calcium channels close and the potassium channels open. And then potassium leaves. That's what happens at 3. And then it goes back to resting membrane potential. So can you see here how in neurons in the SA node, and now here we are using sodium channels, calcium channels, potassium channels. The body uses the same mechanism if it works and it's not broken. Happy days. Now, let's learn about ECGs. When you are taking an ECG, what you're doing is that you're actually taking lots and lots of photos of the heart, the electrical activity of the heart. The ECG wave is just a composite of all of those photos. So if you think of each of these leads as a camera, the wave is when you add all of those photos together. And what you're looking at is the electrical activity of the heart. You're measuring the action potential or electrical activity of the heart. Okay? That's what you're doing. And so people have worked out what each part of the wave represents. Okay? So the P wave means that there is depolarization, which means that the atria are going to contract. The QRS represents the contraction of the ventricles, or ventricular depolarizations, because it's an action potential. Action potential is coming back to haunt you again and again and again and again. The T wave just represents the relaxation of the ventricles, which is repolarization. So that's essentially it. It's not that kind of difficult, I guess. So the first thing you need to go is atria depolarization means it's going to contract. But then the atria have to relax. But that, you can't see that because that is all mixed in this wave. That's the only bit that's missing. Because normally what happens is that the atria contract, the atria relax, the ventricles contract, the ventricles relax. So you're missing the atria relaxation part, but that is mixed into here. You can't see it because it's lost when we added all the photos together. So your nursing colleagues have told me that what you guys need to get from this slide is that you need to be able to kind of identify what a normal or abnormal ECG wave looks like. You don't need to be an expert. So just have a look at these, and I'm sure you're going to learn more about them later. Now, a couple of definitions. When someone has arrhythmia, it means that they don't have any cardiac rhythm. So dysrhythmia means that you have a rhythm, but it's abnormal. So remember, because people don't use these words properly, and you know how cranky I get about that. If we're going to learn something, we're going to learn it right. So keep an eye on that. You need to be able to identify if there's something abnormal going on here. Yeah? Right, so now we're going to talk about the cardiac cycle. Actually, I might stop the recording and then do the cardiac cycle separate.